Last video we talked about movies that are made of still images. Today though, we're gonna try to find movies without images at all. Sorry guys, I know this is what draws you to movies in the first place. But hey, it's an audio-visual medium, so to make it even, let's also see if there's any merit to getting rid of the sound, which is probably your second favorite thing about movies, right? If you watched paint drying last episode, you'd be convinced that I was trying to ruin everything good about movies. And it's at this point in the series where you will be asking more and more, is this thing even a movie? But I hope you don't forget to follow that question up with, how can a movie made in this way be a good piece of art? Because that's pretty much the output that we want from all this type of exploring. Good is of course highly subjective, and that's the fun of it, right? We're all gonna leave this series with more questions and answers, so let's have fun with asking. But first, let's get all these visuals out of the way. This is a split-screen comparison of two of the most iconic movies of the 60s. The movie on the right is 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the one on the left is Lawrence of Arabia. Or was it the other way around? Anyway, both of these are grand epics that take you on an extravagant visual adventure. But they decide to start out like this, for a couple of minutes. Call it an overture. It's fitting because these black frames are accompanied by orchestral music. I think it sets the tone really well for both movies. It transports you slowly, without shock. It gives you a moment to detach yourself from the outside world, or whatever you were looking at before these movies, while hypnotically ramping you up for what's about to come. Anything could happen if the movie starts out with a blank slate like this. But it would be kinda weird if such empty screens were to pop up in the middle of a movie. I guess that's part of what makes The Atlantic Man by Marguerite Duras so special. The black empty screen opens up the movie as well. And at that point, it isn't that strange, right? Again, it's a great way to slowly ease into a movie. You can already sense it's gonna be a sad one. It was made in 1981 during a period of depression, and it is about Duras's muse, Jan Andrea, who always had to leave for several days, but is one of the few figures you'll see in this film. Like them, the image goes away from time to time. At first, it felt like an act of cruelty almost. It's an expression of abandonment, absence, and longing, rather than a representation of it. If no image can bring that same sense of loss you feel, then it might just be best to lose all images. Throughout the course of the movie, the blackness takes over. We are brought into solitude with Duras's words. A vast emptiness washes away everything else, like a rising tide. Darkness can also be an imposing entity. The Black Tower by John Smith visualizes this deep sense of emptiness with a black tower. It's so simple and dark. It looks like a hole cut out from the sky. The film also shows nothing screams emptiness better than nothing. So there are a lot of blank frames in this movie, along with just being generally inclined to withhold a lot of imagery. Horror films use absence to show something uncanny. Something should be there, but it isn't. Absence also channels the greatest of all fears, that of the unknown. What could be waiting for you out there in the dark? You could also lose your vision from something colossal, imposing on you, or swallowing you up and eclipsing everything that you can see. It's an unnerving feeling, to be sure, and it's one that I had while watching this film. You know what your perspective often looks like when you're truly afraid? Nothing. You close your eyes. You cover them. So I think the decision to go forth without imagery has a very strong potential for horror cinema. These few examples show effective uses of image absence within the context of the movies they're in. So what if the entire movie itself was blank? What outcomes could that possibly have? The Kuleshov effect creates new meanings through those empty frames being juxtaposed with other images. So what happens if there are no other frames to build that surrounding context? Would you be able to watch a film like that? In Arnulf Rainer by Peter Kobelka, only two types of frames exist: an empty white one and an empty black one. Two complete opposites of one another. No more context other than that. They are used in specific meters that at times go through some extremes. Either a single frame is held too long to the point of boredom, or two frames go back and forth in violent succession, overwhelming to the point of potentially inducing seizures. The harsh, noisy, static score accompanies this perfectly. But so does the complete silence that it goes back to, much like how it treats its images. It's cinema, boiled down to its most fundamental elements: light, dark, sound, and silence. Tony Conrad's The Flicker also does this, though in contrast, The Flicker feels more just straight up painful, for lack of a better term. It doesn't have that random rhythm that Arnulf Rainer does, and so it does feel more like flickering, which is a visual phenomenon we already recognize from other sources, and is still a familiar type of movement. A more contentious idea would be to have no change at all between its frames. Have a plain white frame be put back to back to back to back and projected on a wall. It likely won't be a very good movie, but a movie nonetheless, right? At the very least, it would be one hell of a flashlight. Film projections of white do exist though, and they aren't just that. If you run a reel of film through a projector without shooting anything on it prior, it exhibits film. Not a film, but the film, the one that you used, the material on its own. It would often actually show more than that. There are visual subjects in the frame that still even denote movement. We have dancing film grain, lines and folds, sprocket holes if they're not cropped. If you get some older reels, you might be able to party with some dusted scratches too. Maybe even mold and burns if you're lucky. Debris like these were always present in celluloid films, but are never consciously watched attentively, unless they somehow become the only subject of the frame. You can see the value of film materiality in the difference between the work of Namjoon Paik that you find online versus the ones found in exhibits, such as Zen for Film, which is unexposed film whose supposedly beautiful textures are rendered powerless in its digital copy.
There's also a type of meta movement going on with this piece, in that every time you project it, it would accumulate more dust, among other subtle visual elements, thus constantly altering the subject of its frame serendipitously in each viewing.
The phenomena isn't just found in traditional film media. There's a parallel to the glitches of analog video and even digital material. You can find it when examining the static in television footage or the corruption of digital files. You can even take a video with your lens cap still on, expecting only a black video, but if you tweak the brightness, you might be surprised to find some quiet, starry scenery. This is what happens in the film Digital Materialism by artist _blank at null66913. I can appreciate the minimalism in these visual phenomena. Sometimes watching something that is so lacking can open up a whole new path for your train of thought. Those simple films that contain the range of black and white can allow one's mind to fall into its boundless blank canvas void. This type of experience would vary tremendously with every viewer. The films that focus on pure materiality also show us these elements that still affect us whenever we see their visual cues. These movies are also interesting just as artifacts that for some reason had to exist at this point in time to shed light on things we didn't expect we'd ever want to focus on. And I think that's kind of cool to remember. Nathaniel Dorsky said in his book Devotional Cinema that for alchemy to take place in a film, the form must include the expression of its own materiality, and this materiality must be in union with its subject matter. If this union is not present, if the film's literalness is so overwhelming, so illustrative, that it obliterates the medium it is composed of, then one is seduced into a dream state of belief or absorption that, though effective on that level, lacks the necessary ingredients for transmutation. Such a film denies its totality. It denies the fact of what it's actually made of. I got this from Maximilian Luke Proctor's essay for The Atlantic Man, because the blank frames in that movie do highlight the film's materiality, and I think the entire film is all the more transcendent for it. Films can be made without image or materiality as its subject. Just straight up nothing. You could watch it with a blindfold. And by it, I mean the movie Blindfold, by director Binoy Karaman. It's a film made from the perspective of a blind man who becomes a witness to a murder. It tells its narrative purely through sounds, and it's set to be India's first ever audio cinema ever when it comes out. Back in 2018 though, the Festival de Nouveau Cinema was screening nothing. The screen wasn't doing anything, but there were 27 speakers blasting poetry and diary entries from Percy B. Shelley. It was narrated in multiple languages and backed by a dreamy soundtrack, playing to a group of people listening together in a dark theater. This is Shelley's Blaze, directed by Celine Terre and Ludovic Chavarro. They had a more artistic, abstract take on imageless storytelling. The film had a non-linear structure and prioritized the poetics that you could glean from Shelley's life and works, and built an emotional journey out of that. As with almost all the films I talk about, I'll link it down below. I don't know if you'll be engaging with it as a creative podcast or a movie, but I do already know I like this sort of approach they're doing.
Comme une bête inconsciente de sa chaîne.
In the world
Dans le
unknown.
monde inconnu.
This abstract use of poetry and minimalism blew my mind when I experienced Derek Jarman's 1993 film, Blue. It is exactly what the title says. Blue. For its entire runtime of almost 80 minutes. The same blue frame projected back to back to back to back. No movement, no change. If this is still a movie, then it would be one of my all-time favorite ones. That classic saying, show, don't tell, is completely reversed here. That old storytelling commandment is apparently not necessary in order to connect to people. or convey a story, or to wholeheartedly express oneself through film. I mean, why should that advice be followed when you have such beautiful words to tell us?
The shattering bright light of the eye specialist's camera leaves that empty sky blue after image. Did I really see green the first time? As the photographs progress, colors change to pink and the light turns to orange. The process is a torture, but the result, stable eyesight, worth the price, and the 12 pills I have to take a day.
Lush soundscapes surround this plain blue screen, and most of that is human speech. Would you then call this a piece of music, or spoken word poetry, or again a podcast with a non-algorithm friendly thumbnail? Well, I think that the visual aspect of the film is way too integral for such a claim, even if that element seems so minimal. As a guy who likes movies, talking to all of you who also love movies about this director who devoted his life to movies, I gotta say, it feels wrong to not be given any images besides this blue screen for the entire runtime. But it's even more heartbreaking to know that the ability to see images was actually taken away from the real life of Derek Jarman. And it was taken, not lost. Listening to the monologue, the realization comes to us that Jarman was a victim of the AIDS epidemic that terrorized the world and was especially brutal towards the queer population under the United States government's incompetence and ignorance. Jarman's health deteriorated due to the virus until his vision was completely gone. I really admire that grounded point in the story of Blue, amidst plenty of moments that seem to reach transcendent heights. It is spoken word poetry at times. It is also ramblings to the point of gibberish. It is reading a diary out loud. It is singing. The timbre and tone of the voices made it constantly engrossing, and the sounds that back these up are amazing.
I can just see myself traveling to Berlin with a fridge under my arm.
Derek Jarman to airport information.
Impatient youths of the sun, burning with many colors.
Field recordings punctuate the irreconcilable separation between what we can hear and what we can't see. There is always that looming sense of lack, something out of reach. There's so much creative vision that Jarman has, and it enabled him to find a way to share that sense of lack with us viewers. We are invited to see with his eyes and commiserate together. The vacuum of images also enables us to project our own visions. We are made to reach out into this blue void and grasp whatever we can get to understand it. And because of that, this film felt immense. At some point, it felt like being lost in the deep blue sea. There's no shortage of heart-wrenching words that I could spend hours reading into. I wouldn't say that the writing makes up for the absence of images, because the image present here is a deliberate choice. Just like how every movie designs every shot and frame to add up to telling its story, each and every frame of Blue is an intended way of expressing its unique story of the unimaginable. This makes me want to go back one more time to The Atlantic Man for a sec. It has a cool little segment where the disconnect of image and sound is made conspicuous. It's when it says, "Listen," but the film is in absolute silence. Instead, we watch the waves crash into the shore. and then it's black while saying, "You've left the camera's field of view."
Vous êtes sorti du champ de la caméra.
And now, with the emptiness of the frame, we hear the ocean waves crashing.
Vous êtes absent.
It brought me back to nostalgia, and I mean the Hollis Frampton film that we discussed before in this series. Because it is so, well, nostalgic, and it made the displacement feel so real. Coming from that similar playfulness with the displacement of images and sounds. And that's what we'll be talking about next. There's a scene in Sherrod Anthony Sanchez's Imburnal that is just pure black, with only a simple instrumental acoustic guitar tune backing it. It goes on for around 10 minutes, and I guess it functions as kind of an interlude for the over 4-hour-long movie. Not that we needed a break or anything, because a lot of the movie is just people chilling. It's a very odd choice that made me think my copy was broken. That's because this scene is found within a larger segment of the movie that does the inversion of this. Before and after that imageless interlude, the movie plays video footage without any audio at all. And this was weirder. Watching moving images in silence is not something typically enjoyed as much as just listening to a song. Let's look into this technique. Well, first off, this is oftentimes not even considered a technique. It would more commonly be regarded as a mistake, or 130 years ago, just normal. Cinema, at its inception, wasn't considered as an audiovisual medium. You make a picture move, and you have a moving picture, or a movie. And that was mind-blowing as it is. Still, we can see from these early films that there was already an immediate desire by filmmakers to add a musical aspect to their work. The silent era was full of these films and had additional music to help tell the stories of these silent films after they were shot. Once technology and technique had evolved to capture diegetic sound, that had quickly become the norm. So I want to look at the period that came after the silent age, that instead chose to still forego sound voluntarily. Okay, but why would any filmmaker want to do this on purpose? Doesn't it just reduce how they can affect their audience? Well, one reason I could rationalize could be that it's just really difficult or expensive to have good music in your film. Especially if you're one of those independent filmmakers with no budget that we've been talking about in this series. You'd have to get the rights to a song or hire some musicians and sound engineers. And if you don't go all out with that, it could very easily end up bad. These parts too have gotten easier with the advent of certain editing software and the internet, which does bring me to another idea. These modern silent movies could be interactive today. It's a new way you can enjoy these. You can put music of your choice into the movies.
A famous pairing would be Dark Side of the Moon with The Wizard of Oz.
There are so much edits of this, as well as many other expressive yet quiet film sequences. But it's even much easier than that. When we watch these films on YouTube or Vimeo, it's so easy to just open another tab and play whatever music you would like. It's a whole new experience of the movie, which is active, creative, and personal. Take, for example, a film I talked about before, Skagafjordur by Peter Hutton. Its silence gave me the idea to watch it while listening to Sigur Rós. It was a pretty obvious choice because both of these are Icelandic and they offer this transcendent feeling of being soothed while also awestruck. The two pieces of art elevated each other through this pairing. But I think the most interesting reason for voluntary mute movies as an artistic decision is focus. Having no sound in the film makes you give 100% of your attention to the visuals. Think of it like turning off the car radio when you're parking. Or since we're talking about engaging with art here, maybe a more familiar instance is when you're listening to music and you decide to close your eyes to feel the song better and absorb it in a much deeper way. So when filmmakers do this, it's probably because they really want to hone in on the visuals of their piece. Sometimes there is just that much to appreciate with the images alone. It really could be that intricate already. A lot of these works fall under video art and are presented not in an enclosed theater with perfect acoustics and tons of speakers. Instead, they'd be part of an exhibit out in the open with other art pieces. And in this environment, having a mute cinematic piece completely makes sense. Sound introduces another layer of sensory experience that could dictate everything around it. Sometimes it just can't fit with an artist's vision for a film. Let's go back to Skagafjordur one more time. Aside from this film not having any sound, remember earlier, it was also my example of a movie not having a script. Now I said back then that it could still have a summary, like, there's this mountain standing still. The majestic clouds slowly pass by. You could write an insipid plot summary for movies like these, because something recognizable happens. But how would you write the synopsis for a film like this? This is exactly the type of sophisticated visual treatment that silence can help you understand. I'm reserving a lot more of the best examples of movies without sound for the upcoming videos, because we'll be talking about abstract films. That's also where we'll discuss the parallels and differences of the art forms of soul video with soul audio, which is music, since that art form's abstract too, and it gets really interesting in comparison. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Next up, we got movies without reality. See you there.